Today we are talking about New Kings and Kingdoms, Class 7 History Chapter 2 NCERT pattern. Class 7 History Chapter 2 NCERT pattern, New Kings and Kingdoms. In the earlier session, we tried to understand 1,000 years of history. In the previous classes, we have studied ancient history of India. In the previous session, we had a look at the medieval history of India, 700 to 1750. Now let us look at the new kings and kingdoms that came into existence in India during this period, the medieval history. 7th century was a turning point. 700 to 1750 or 700 to 1700 was a turning point in Indian history. Many large kingdoms came into existence. New dynasties came up. Large kingdoms came into existence. New dynasties came up. Now, as people started getting prosperous, as wealth accrued, not only the traders or the individual peasants who made money, the kings also became more powerful as they have more wealth. When they have more wealth, they go into more wars or they plunder other kingdoms and then they gain more wealth. The bigger the kingdom becomes, the larger will be the tax revenue. So they still grow further. So the growth becomes very fast as it starts growing, the momentum picks up. Now, some of the famous kings or the dynasties that existed during the post 7th century in India were the Gurjara, the Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas, the Palas, the Cholas, and the Chauhans. Now, there were large landlords or warrior chiefs. Now, because there are many wars, or people wanted an army, and people, generals or the chieftains who can lead the army, there were warrior chiefs. And there were people who were having large tracts of land. Now, these people were considered as mini kings, or the kings used to allow them certain powers, certain rights, and certain duties. So, whenever there is a war, the warrior chief will have to send an army or go and fight for the king. Whenever there is a war, the landlord will have to send a lot of money for financing the war. Whenever there is no war, even then the landlords will have to pay them a portion of their income as taxes or revenue or rent so that the kingdom can be run by the king in a better fashion. So these people had their own duties, they had their own rights, the large landlords or warrior chiefs. But technically they were mini kings or recognized as the king for that small region by the actual kings of the various dynasties and kingdoms. Now they were called Samantas. Samantas means subordinate of the kings. Now they provided the money or the people, because in those days armed support means you don't give some atom bomb to them, you give hundreds of people who will go fight and die for you. So that is why you provide armed support as well as wealth for the kingdom. Now these Samantas, as they grew richer as time passed, they started calling themselves as Mahasamanta. Maha means what? Bigger, big, large. Maha Mandal Ishvara. Ishvara is what? Lord. Mandal means what? Region. Maha means big. So you are the lord of a bigger region. You are a Samanta, that is a landlord, but you are a Mahasamanta, bigger. Though you are a subordinate, you are a bigger subordinate. So you used to, as a Samanta or as a landlord, people started giving themselves bigger titles. And even the kings recognize them by giving titles. Why? When you give titles, when you give somebody a promotion from Samanta to Mahasamanta, people will feel happy. They will feel more loyal. They will work for you a little bit more. So all this happened. And sometimes the warrior chiefs themselves took the title. Sometimes the king gave them title and recognized them and gave them more power, more duties and more rights and bigger areas to manage. Now what happened is, in due course, these Samantas asserted independence. They said, no, we are independent. We are no more a subordinate of you as a king. We have our own kingdom. One example is that happened in the Rashtrakuta dynasty and Chalukya dynasty. A person who was a Rashtrakuta told the Chalukya dynasty, now I am no more your subordinate, I am a separate kingdom. So this, when Samanta did like this, many people also look at this and said, oh, he is not a subordinate, why let us also not do something similar, and people started doing. What will happen? Some kings were able to crush that, some kings were not able to. So that is what gave rise to newer dynasty or a newer kingdom. Now there was a person called Dandi Durga, he was a Rashtrakuta. He overthrew the Chalukyas. Not only that he declared he is independent, he overthrew the Chalukya and then started calling himself the king of the Chalukya kingdom, not just a Rashtrakuta. What he did? Now in those days, not everybody can become a king. You had this four Varna system, the Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the Shudra, Vaishya and all. So some were traders some were peasants, some were fighters or the armed personnel like that. So if you are not a Kshatriya, but you were a Samanta, you are a landlord or a warrior chief, now you wanted to become a king, what you do, what they did is they conducted a Ashwamedha where nobody will say that they are opposing you. Or you conduct a Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha is a sort of rebirth, born again. So what happens? By that process, by that ritual, you call yourself a Kshatriya and then you have already overthrown the king and you got the kingdom under your control. So you become the king of that kingdom. So that is what Dandidurga did. Now there was another person, Kadamba Mayurasham. So Mayurasham, what he did, he was a Gurjara Pratihara, right? And then they were Brahmanas. Mayurasham and the Pratihara Harishchandra were Brahmanas. And they were not Kshatriyas. But what they did, they gave up the Brahmana duties, they took up the arms and started acting as a Kshatriya and ruling the kingdom. So this also happened. Now these are the maps of India in medieval period, 700 or 900 or 1000 CE, common era. So 700 to 1700 is a period that we are looking at. So there was a Rashtrakuta dynasty here. And then it became a Chalukya, the same area only, but you will find it as a Chalukya king. Earlier there was a Pallava ruler ruling this portion of the southern India. Now after some time you find it was not a Pallava ruler, but it is a Chola empire that is spanning all this area. After some more time you will find Chola empire has become still bigger. Likewise, there was a big Pala empire. Then it became smaller for various reasons. I mean, Gurjara Parihara started. And then the Pala empire again became big and they became small. When the Ghazni War happened. Ghazni War is what Muhammad Ghazni started coming with expeditions. Likewise, this Gurjara Parihara empire was big. Then they became smaller because Chauhan started setting up a dynasty there by overcoming or taking away portions of this. So what you can see is over a period of time, the border or the earmark or the areas of whichever empire or whichever kingdom was there that kept on changing. You had a Vanga, which is a Ganges basin. You had a Utkala, which is now today's Orissa. So like that, you had different kings. You had a Kalinga, which is again part of today's Orissa. You have Kanuj. Kanuj is a map we have seen, which is also not an Al-Idrisi's map, but in subsequent map, this was there, right? So these are the different shapes and sizes of the empires and kingdoms in India during the 1700 to 1750 period that kept on changing because of the capabilities or the growth of different kings. There was a small Kashmir kingdom, it remained similar, but little bit sizes and changes were there. Kamarupa kingdom or Chandela kingdom or Lakurachitra kingdom. So many kingdoms were there which were coming and going depending upon the capabilities of the different rulers. Now, how did administration happen during those days in ancient Indian kingdoms or the rulers? Now, there was something called Maharaja Adiraja. Maharaja is what? A big king. Adiraja is the first king. So, people used to get titles like this, the big kings or the leaders of these big kingdoms. Then there was a title called Tribhuvana Chakravartin. What is Tribhuvana Chakravartin? Chakravarti itself is emperor. Tribhuvana is of the three worlds. So people believed hell, heaven and earth, three worlds. So Maharaja Adiraja, the first among the Maharajas or the Chakravarti of the three worlds. Like that people had titles. That means what? They were growing big in size, in power, in wealth, in ability to win wars, in the ability to bring other kingdoms under their control. That means what? They had capabilities to administer large areas to keep them under control because in those days there was no communication that was easy. So unless you know what is happening on the other extreme of the kingdom, you cannot control. There could be an uprising, somebody would have come and then called that as their own area and then subdued it. So you need to have capability to administer large areas. Now these kings did share their power with the Samantas, the guild of artisans, the warrior chiefs, the landlords, right? Now, how did they get the money? They got money to run the shop, run the show, run the kingdom from the rent and the taxes. Rent for the land or taxes for their produce. Taxes for the produce means what? If you have agriculture, then for every quintal of rice you harvest, you will pay some tax. Or if you are having breeding cows and goats, then for every cow or goat you have, you will pay this much tax. So like that, people were asked to pay taxes or rent for using the land. Sometimes people were not having it, it was forcibly taken. Sometimes people knew how much they have to pay in the beginning itself, so they voluntarily gave. So the rent or tax paid to the kings could be forced, it could be voluntary, but at the end of the day, the kings were able to collect enough money for running the kingdom. Now the kings don't have to directly come and collect. They have the samantas, they have the landlords, they have the chieftains. They will collect from the respective villages and they will pay the share whatever they feel is due to the king. Sometimes when the kings have an invasion of another neighboring kingdom, they plunder the wealth of that kingdom. So whatever richness, when you find that some other kingdom is prosperous and you need money, you go and attack them and take away all their money. Is it right? There was no question of right or wrong in those days. There was a question of how big my empire is and how much I am able to expand. What do you do with all this money? You don't buy latest Mercedes cars because there was no technology in those days. Using that money, the kings used to build forts so that your country is protected. Fort is a fortification. You used to build temples for the gods who were benevolently giving you all these victories. And then the temples were the places where all the money was also kept. And then the money was used for financing further war. That was also done. And then money was used for palace expenses. Big palaces were also built. Now, for administration, there were 400 different terms used for different kinds of taxes in the Chola period. That means what? There was different ways, a variety of ways and means by which the king was able to collect a small portion of the income of the subjects in the form of taxes. Now, there was a word called vetti. Vetti taken not in cash but in the form of forced labor. Vetti means a cut. So what happens is the subjects of that kingdom will have to do some work for the king. Maybe participate in the army or maybe something else, build a temple or build a fort. They have to do the work. They will not be you don't have to give cash to the king, but you have to do some work. And then there was another thing when people were poor, the kings used to give some work to the people, and then in return for the work that the people do, food and clothing used to be given. Now there was something called kadamai. Kadamai today means duty. Kadamai was a type of revenue for the land that the subjects will have to pay to the king. Then there were also taxes when you become rich. That means what? If you have a thatched house, for thatching the house you have to pay a tax. If you are using ladder to climb palm trees, you have to pay a tax. But if you are climbing on my own tree climber, then you don't have to pay. Now, if you are getting property from your parents, you did not do any work, your parents earned money, you just inherited the property. For inheritance, you have to pay a tax as a successor of that property. So, like that, there were different ways in which kings were charging taxes to the people of the subjects. Now, sometimes what happens, the duty of tax collection or the duty of being a warrior or a general or in the army were all hereditary because they believe if the father is good in fighting a war, then the son will also have it in his genes to fight a war for the king. So they were working for the king as a tax collector or as a knight hereditarily. So this was also happening. So that is the way administration happened. So in the family itself, people had a knowledge of how to either fight a war or how to collect taxes or how to ensure there is no revenue leakage. What is prasasti? Prasasti is the speciality, appreciation of the specialities or eulogies or saying praising. You are so great, you had gone to the moon, you are as bright as a sun, you are as cool as a wind, you are as wide as a ocean. Appreciation you give. So is it false? Maybe it is false, maybe it is right. But the ultimate purpose is one. When you say something nice about the king will give you a prize or a reward or a gift. And second is the king will also ask to be recorded the specialities of the king so that the others will know how great this person is, and so small kings will not fight against, big kings will appreciate, and then it will be easy for them to run the kingdom. So these may not be fully true. Why? Because so many things that they say there we cannot believe today that better have happened. And who writes this? Mostly the nobles in the court or the brahmanas or the literary geniuses. Now, this talks about the kindness and philanthropy, that you had given so much land as a gift, you had built such a big temple, you have fought this war, you have broken that fort, you built this fort, all that used to be there. It also used to tell stories about how much land was gifted by whom to whom for what was entrusted, who was given the right to collect tax, who was made the general, and things like that. And then we have a copper plate inscription recently recovered from southern India that tells about how the allotments were worded, which land was given to whom for tax collection and how much tax was collected and how it was accounted. All that is there in a copper plate inscription engraving. So this is prasasti. Prasasti is a record of appreciation of somebody on somebody who is powerful, rich, wealthy, influential. Now, one example of processes is the achievements of Nagabhatta. Who was Nagabhatta? Nagabhatta was a Pratihara king of the Gwalior MP. We know where is Gwalior MP. Gwalior MP, he was a king of this area. Okay, so what was the processes saying? It said the kings of Andhra, Vidarbha, everybody fell before him even when he was a prince. That means he had not even become a king, he was only a prince. But people were falling at his feet by paying him respects and being afraid of him. And then he said he won a victory over Chakrayuddha. He won a victory over Chakrayuddha. Here is a Chandelar king and a Chauhan king, and he had a victory over Chakrayuddha. And then he said he defeated the king of Vanga, which is Ganges area, Bengal, and then Anartha, the king of Gujarat, then Malava and Kerala and Trushiga, Vatsya, Matsya, all the kingdoms he had won over. The Pratihara king, they said he had won over all the kingdoms. If that is the case, how did this kingdom remain only this much size? Why did it not become like this? So, sometimes it may not be 100% true, but it is a record of what they intended to do, how they wanted to be known, and things like that. Right? Okay. Now, there is also a record. Now, a land was given to a landlord or as a gift to a temple. Now, in the Chola time, they had a record of what it was given. They said this land contains fruit-bearing trees, water, land, gardens, orchards, trees, wells, open spaces, pasture land, village, handhills, platforms, canals, ditches, rivers, silt-sodden land, tanks, granaries, fish pond, beehives, deep. That means what? Of that area, one village or one town was given away to one person for a purpose, and then it says this is embankment, this is a border, this is the four corners of the area that has been given. It contains what is in and what is not. And then it says what rights he has. He has a right to collect taxes for that land. He has a right to give judicial decision within that area. He has a right to put a tax on either bitty leaves or cloth. You know why bitty leaves and cloth? Bitty leaves were chosen only by rich people. Cloth was owned only by rich people. So he could put a tax on all those things. Even vehicles, if you had a bullock cart, you can have a tax on it. What else he can do? He can build a building. He will take care in case of a flood. He will dig a pond or a vessel well to ensure there is no shortfall for water. So like that, what were his rights, what were his duties, what he can do, what is given to him, all that was recorded. This is one. So now what happens is these processes had various inscriptions, and then from that we were able to know what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and all. Now, is it that kings only took the taxes and did nothing else? May not be. Now, welfare of the people were really in mind of the various kings. Now, for the welfare of the people, they adopted different means, which today may not be the best way to do things, but different kings and different kingdoms had different ways of taking care of their people. Now there were different kingdoms, there were different dynasties. Now each was trying to control the other, thinking what if my kingdom becomes big, the wealth will be shared by all the people and all my people will be happy. So when you start doing something, you will think of only the people who are now your subjects. But when you annex another kingdom, that kingdom also becomes yours, they also become your subjects and you have to provide for them also. That is secondary. So to demonstrate your power also, to demonstrate your influence and to get some resources, people used to go on wars and annex the neighboring countries. Now this attempt to annex one another was more frequent, more prominent in the Ganges Valley between the Ganga and Yamuna. Why? Because of these two rivers, that area, that plain, the central Indian plain or the northern Indian plain was very fertile area. Lots of peasants were making a lot of money by having lots of crops over there. Two types of crops used to be there every year. So tax collection was also good. And so the kings were rich, and so each king wanted to get a portion of that richness. So they were fighting with each other. Who were fighting with each other? The Gurjara king, the Rashtrakuta king, and the Pala king. The Gurjara king, the Rashtrakuta king, and Pala king were fighting with each other. This is the Gurjara, this is the Pala. So Gurjara, Pala. So these kings were fighting with each other. So this Gurjara Rashtrakuta Pala fight was known as a tripartite struggle. Why? Because these three kings were the ones who were fighting with one or the other every other time. And they were targeting the temples because temples were rich. Why temples were rich? Not only the kings, even the individuals, the rich peasants, the nobles, the wealthy peasants, the traders, everybody used to give money to the temple. Temple was very rich. Temple had their own land. Temple had their own cows and ox. So temples were rich. So people used to target temples to plunder their wealth. Now, is it that the only Indian kings were fighting with each other and targeting temples? No. In those days, in this area, there was somebody called Muhammad Ghazni, Sultan Muhammad Ghazni. He was a king of Afghanistan and the area beyond that. He was a king of Central Asia. He was a king of Iran. So, in the Central Asia, he was a king. He was a ruler. And what is Sultan? Sultan is the Maharaja equivalent of the king, or the word for chief of the kingdom, that is used in the Islamic part of the world or on the Persian kingdoms in those days. So Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni, he was ruling Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia and all. And then almost for every year for 17 long years, I think, he raided India. He came. His intention was not to annex the Indian continent or not to make these kingdoms part of his. He came, raided, plundered, took away all the wealth from all the temples and all the kings and went back. He let the kings be continue as a ruler. He let the temples remain there. But then he took away the wealth. He targeted the temples and used this wealth to build a capital at Ghazni, a beautiful capital he had built over there. How did we know? We knew this and other capabilities of this Ghazni from Al-Biruni, a chronicler. Why did this chronicler write all this? Because Ghazni was not only interested in plundering the money from here, he was also interested in knowing about our history, our culture, etc. So he asked Al-Biruni, a chronicler, to stay back in India, study the different kingdoms, study the people, study their behavior, and then make a record of it. So that was written in an Arabic book called Kitab al-Hind, about him book on India. Al-Biruni had written at the request or on the instructions of Ghazni. So there, this is also a record that he came almost every year to take away the wealth from the kings and temples. Now, Chahmanas is a type of dynasty or a kingdom that we have here. Chauhan kingdom had the Chahmanas. Now, what is special about Chahmanas? Delhi and Ajmer were the places where they were ruling. They tried to expand westward and eastward, so they should fight with whom? They had to fight with Chalukyas and Ghalwals, but they were not able to expand. But then in due course, there was a king called Prithviraj III. He was able to overcome these and expand the Chauhan kingdom. Prithviraj Chauhan was able to expand the kingdom. But unfortunately, Prithviraj kingdom had to fight with Gori also. And when he fought with Gori, once he went against Gori, and next year he lost against Gori, Prithviraj Chauhan. You would have learnt in the stories that Gori asked him, what do you want? You are lost, but then you are a king. You tell me what do you want? And Prithviraj told him, I want to be treated as a king. You remember that story? This is a Prithviraj Chauhan. Now, studying about Cholas. The Cholas were famous for so many things, including the bronze idols that they have, statues, and the Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple. Why it is called Gangai Konda Cholapuram? Gangai Konda Cholapuram means the Chola who went and won the Ganges. That means what? There was a king called Rajendra who had an expedition up to Ganges. So that is why he was called Gangai Konda Chola. And so to remember that, he built a city called Gangai Konda Cholapuram. Okay. Now Urayur to Tanjavur, how would it grow? Now Urayur was a small place. Urayur was ruled by a clan called Muttarayar. Urayur was ruled by a clan called Muttarayar. It was in the Kaveri Delta. Now the Kaveri Delta is very famous because it is again is a rich area. It is a fertile area. Lots of prosperity was there. Now these Muttarayar clan that ruled Kaveri Delta were subordinate to the Pallava kings. They were subordinated to the Pallava kings. As you see, Chola Empire was not big. Only Pallava Empire was here, and this Pallava king was ruling the Muttarayar clan was ruling the Kaveri Delta as a subordinate of Pallava king. Now there was a guy called Vijayalaya. Vijayalaya was from Urayur. Now what he did, he captured Urayur from Muttarayar. Vijayalaya captured Urayur from Muttarayar. So what happened? Muttarayar was subordinate of Pallava. Now there is no more Muttarayar. Vijayalava became the head of or ruler of chieftain of the Kaveri Delta, Urayur. Then he built a town called Tanjavur. He was a what you call Bhakt of Nishambasudi, and he built a temple also. Just by taking over the rulership of Kaveri Delta from Muttarayar, by overcoming them, the Vijayalava, another small chieftain, was able to build a town called Tanjavur and build a temple for Nrsimhasundari. His successors, what they did, they conquered the Pandyan and Pallava territory. So the Pallava kings were overpowered by the successors of Vijayalaya. And then came the king called Rajaraja the One. Rajaraja I was considered to be the most powerful Chola ruler. He became the king in 985. Rajaraja I became the king in 985. He was a powerful Chola ruler. Was he the best? No. He had a son called Rajaraja. Son is called Rajendra. Rajendra expanded further. Rajaraja expanded the kingdom, and then almost all the Pandyan and Pallava empire no more existed, only Chola empire existed. And then he reorganized administration, and then Rajendra. Rajendra not only went up to Ganges in the north, he did even send a naval expedition to Lanka in the south, Sri Lanka in the south. So this is how the Chola empire expanded. So they built the Gangaikonda Cholapuram, they built the Brihadishwara temple, they built the stone, they were good in working artisans, they patronized art and artisans. Now, the splendid temples is a specialty of the Chola kingdom. What is a splendid temple? One is a Tanjavur Brihadishwara temple and another is a Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple. They are architectural and sculptural marvel. Means what? Architecture is very special. In Tanjavur temple, the sunlight comes into the temple sanctum sanctorum only on certain days of the year. That means what? They knew what is solstice, what is equinox, when is sun at Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn, what angle the sun will be on which date and how it will come. All that calculation they knew. That is why we call as architectural wonder. We call it as a sculptural marvel because beautiful sculptures were made on large rocks and stones, and then rocks and stones from faraway places were brought to Tanjavur or Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Here there were no rocks available, so they knew how to transport, they knew how to carve out. All that technology was there, or the artisans were skilled and they were well paid. Elaborate sculptures. Now Gopuram. Gopuram is what? A tapering roof. That is the specialty of these temples, the South Indian temples. And then temples became the nuclei of settlement. Around the temple, lots of people used to live. Why? Because one, temple is endowed with the land. Second, temple is a hub of economic, social, and cultural life because even the traders or the peasants, everybody used to come to pray for a better future. And then temple started having lots of employees, specialists. What specialists? Priest, garland maker, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. So all these people used to stay in and around the temple, and so when so many people stay around the temple, so many traders will also stay to sell wares to them. So likewise, temple became the nuclei of settlements. If you look at so many temples, the within the 100-200 meter of the temple, it will be very crowded with buildings and people and shops and things like that because everything was there within a arm's length of the temple. The temples were also known for bronze images. Bronze images were very distinctive. So many images have been taken away by so many Europeans from so many temples, but these were specially cast and the technology was available in those days with these people. Second, the Chola Empire is known for the irrigation or agriculture. Already we know the Kaveri Delta had so many tributaries and distributaries. In addition to that, these people, the Chola administrators, did two things. One, they made a lot of canals so that whenever there is a flood, the water will get spread to other areas. Whenever there is no flood, this water from the river will be taken to the areas where agriculture needs irrigation. Second is they built dams, small dams they built based on which the water during the rainy season was stored and then used in the canals in the subsequent season. Not only that, the Kaveri Delta canals, because of the frequent floods, were carrying sediments from up in the north and bringing them to the Kaveri Delta and making it fertile every season. So that was also one reason why it was a prosperous region. Now, as the kingdom expanded, as they wanted to build more towns, they did clear more forest. They cleared forest not only for building town, but also for having more agricultural land because more people were there in the kingdom. So, planning, organizing, all those capabilities, coordinating, all these capabilities were there in the Chola kingdom in those days because based on this, we know how the water was managed, how the sluice gates were built in the dams, how the temples were built in spite of not having enough rocks nearby, all those things. This is a specialty of the Chola Empire. Now, what more is the political or the administrative setup of the Chola Empire? Ur is a settlement of peasants. OOR is a pronunciation, Uror. Now also if you go in Tamil Nadu, so many places will have their name as Ur. Velur, Urayur, like that. Ur is a settlement of peasants. It's a prosperous unit and irrigation and agriculture were the main occupation in that unit. Now, Nadu is a group of villages. It is from the word Nadu only the Tamil Nadu name itself come. Cheranadu, Cholanadu, Kongunadu. So, Nadu is a group of villages. Village council used to take care of the administrative function was what? Collecting the tax and delivering justice. So, they were the police, they were the judge and they were the tax collectors, the village council. Now, after Nadu, you had Nagaram. Today, Nagaram is called city. Madurai Managaram is a city. Only Nagaram is a town. Coimbatore Nagaram or Erode Nagaram, Salem Nagaram is a town or city. Today, in olden days, Nagaram is the trader association or a settlement. Trader association or settlement, something little bigger than the Nadu. Rich peasants of the Velala caste exercised considerable control over the Nagarams. Velala word comes from Velala caste is what used to control the agriculture in those days. They were rich peasants. Now Velala word comes from Velanmai. Velanmai in Tamil stands for agriculture. Velala, Velanmai. So rich landlords got titles like Moovendha Velan. Moovendha Velan means what? You are a Velan. You are the one who holds the veil in the army and work for me, but you are not just a Valen. You were Moovendha Valen. You are a Valen for all the three kings. So titles like this were given. We have seen even in earlier also that people used to have different titles. What was the titles that we saw earlier? Samanta became Mahasamanta, Mahamandala Ishvara, etc. Right? So like that, the titles were there. Moovendha Velan, like the titles were there. Now, as a mark of respect, this was given to them. And then they were doing more work by getting more titles. Now, Brahmanas also settled in Kaveri Valley a lot. Now, what were Brahmanas doing? Because more temples were built, Brahmanas are the one who knew more about the Vedas and the rituals, and so they got a lot of engagement in these temples. Not only that, Brahmanas got a lot of land as grants. So, what they did, Brahmanas created a Brahmana Sabha to manage their land, and they meticulously, religiously, efficiently recorded all that happened in their land in a very detailed fashion. So there was a higher quality of management of the lands or the areas under the control of the Brahmanas, where Brahmana Sabha was having the control. Now land was also classified into different types during the Chola Empire. Like the administrative units were the Ur or the Nadu or the Nagaram. The land was classified as Velan Vage. Velan Vage means what? Meant for agriculture is a simple meaning of it. So Velan Vage stood for non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Brahmadeva is the one given to Brahmas. Brahmadeya is given to Brahmanas. Brahmadeya was given to Brahmanas. Deya is given away. Now you had Shalabhoga. What is Shalabhoga? Shalabhoga is a land for maintenance of a school. Land given to maintain the school. Now Devadana and Thiruman Matukani. Tirunamatukani was a land gifted to temples. So land was gifted to temples, land was gifted to school, land was gifted to Brahmanas, and there were non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Velan Vagai, Brahmadeya, Shalabhoga, and Tirunamatukani. Now Pallichandanam was there. What is Pallichandanam? Pallichandanam is a type of land that was donated to Jaina institutions. So the followers of Jains, Buddha and Mahavira, we had two types of new religions coming up in India during that period. So Jains are the ones who are followers of Mahavira. Buddha's followers were called Buddhists. Jains are the followers of Mahavira. So when land was given to them, it was called Pallichandanam. The Chola kings gave land to the Jains also. Now in Uttaramerur is a place in Chingalpet district. We have an inscription. That inscription talks about how people should take care of their land and the irrigation. taking care of the gardens, taking care of the temples, taking care of the land. Everything is maintained in that inscription. What does it say? It says who are eligible to members of the committee, the Brahmana Sabha committee is written. And then the names will be, names of the eligible people are written on a palm leaf, put it in a urn, and then some small boy will take it up. That means drawing of lots was practiced in those days to ensure everybody has a equal chance. And then they will be one by each committee. One person cannot be in two committees, so there is no concentration risk. Like that, it was managed in those days, the Brahmana Sabha, how it was done. Even there were rules like at what age you can become a member of the Brahmana Sabha. If you have not paid taxes, you cannot become a Brahmana Sabha. If there had been any negative impact of any of your family members, you cannot become a member of the Brahmana Sabha. Like that, there were so many rules and terms and conditions. Eligibility. Now, all those who wish to become members should be first landowners. If you don't have land, and then you cannot become a management member of the Brahmana Sabha for the all the land. You should have your own homes. Own home should be there to ensure what, so that you don't try to apportion the money of or the properties of the common good into your personal good. Your age should be 35 to 70. Then you should have knowledge of the Vedas. You should be administration and honesty. You should have well versed in. And then, if you have been a member in last 3 years, you cannot become a member. You cannot lifetime continue to be. So how different this is from the today's politicians, you can see. Look at the age of the today's politicians. Look at their knowledge level in certain things, whether they should be well versed or not. Do you need to be honest? Is it that you should already have your home or you should already have a land, or anybody can become? So look at these rules and look at the rules that today's politicians are. And today's politicians rule the whole state or the country. And in those days, they were ruling only the Brahmana Sabha's land, a small portion of the assets that they had. Now, Peripuranam is an epic written in Tamil in 12th century. Peripuranam. Now, Peripuranam has a story about somebody who used to live on the outskirts of Adanur. Adanur. Adanur is a place. It was a small hamlet of Polayas. Polayas is one of the caste which was not considered to be high ranking. That means what? They were not big peasants, they were not big traders, they were not big warriors, they were not anybody big. So they were normal, small, ordinary, common people. So Peripuranam talks about a story of the common people. Peripuranam told a story about a Pulaya community hamlet. It means what? Small thatched roof huts in a place called Adanur. So this is an evidence that in those days not only rich people lived, poor people lived. Not only a story about rich people were chronicled, story about poor people were also chronicled. So this is an evidence. Now what is that? It talks about how it used to be there, how their lifestyle used to be, what the husband used to do, what the wife used to do, how the house used to be, what were available in that house, and things like that. So from that, it says how people used to be happy by singing or cooking small things or having a small rest after a work and things like that. So one day's evening, how they were spending the evening, how the Pulayas were spending the evening in their hamlet in Adanur is described in one particular stanza or a poetry in Peripurana. So this gives evidence of the lifestyle of the common man also. It's saying early in the morning, in the dawn, the calling of the brownie plural to their works, which will be they are called to work by whom? Red crested cocks. That means what? The male of the what do you call, rooster, the rooster. And then and by day under the shade of the kanji tree spread the voice of the wavy head. So under the shade of a tree, the wavy haired Pulaya woman means what? They were not oiled and tied and all. Singing as they were husking paddy work they were doing, and while doing work they had a culture of singing to ensure they don't feel tired. So things like that. Where they were sleeping, the baby was put to sleep on a sheet of leather. There were mango trees. So what type of trees were there? Drums were hanging to give a toy for the child. Coconut palms were there. So this used to tell. Tiny headed bitches lay after whelping. That means what? Dogs and cats are also living together with them. So all this information we get from Peripuranam. So inscriptions or eulogies or prasastis used to talk about only kings, rich and wealthy and the winners. No, there were stories which used to address the common man's lifestyle also. Okay, now going back, this is what the 7th century average map used to look like of India. So Mansura were ruling this area, Arabs of Mansura, Arabs of Multan. This was the Kashmir. So these were the rule palas. Why lines are like this? This means this area was not constant. It used to be a fluctuating frontier. Every day a king will fight, and then this will become his country or not, and then come back. Indraprastha of Mahabharata fame, Kanuj, the Chandela Raja, the Prayag Raja, the Banaras kings, the Paramparas kings, the Rashtrakutas, and then you have the Chalukyas here. Kalinga Rajya, this is the Vanga Rajya, Bengal and Ganges area. Utkala, which is the today's Orissa, Chola kingdom, Cheras and Pandyas were here, Pallavas were here. So like that, this is how the territorial map of the kings and dynasties of the medieval India used to look like. Now, when all this was happening in India, what was happening in another faraway place, China, just for comparison, look at the way different kings were managing different countries in different form. There was an empire established under Tang dynasty in 7th century and they ruled for 300 years. That means what 7th to 10th century, single dynasty was ruling. This was not the case here. It was fluctuating. Now, China Tang dynasty ruled for 300 years. Now, what was their capital? Xi'an was the capital. It was one of the largest cities in the world. The capital of China was one of the largest cities in the world at that point in time. We did not have such big cities. And then China was visited by Turks, Iranians, Indians, Japanese, Koreans. So many people visited China during that period. Now here we have very limited information of the people who visited India during the medieval era. We had some Eligibility map, we had one more European map, and then we had the Kitab al-Hind written by a chronicler. So things like that we have somebody had come and gone, but we did not have so many visitors, Turks, Iranians, Indians, Japanese, Koreans. And then bureaucracy was recruited through an examination. The people who run the city and towns were recruited by an examination. And this concept of recruiting by an examination, which started in 7th century, continued till 1911. Now, in India today, if you want to become a civil services officer or Indian police service or Indian forest service or Indian economic service or Indian tax service, you have to write an examination, right? Even today. But then in the Brahmana Sabha times, it was a drawing of lot among the eligible people. So different countries at different points in time had different ways of entrusting responsibilities to people to run the show. So this is what we studied about Indian history in medieval period. Thanks for watching this video. Please keep coming back.